That's the good stuff right here. Hard, soft literature. Yeah. I mean, sort of, kind of. I tell you what, I'll think I'll check it out. You know, I'm not normally one to destroy books, but I'm just kind of big for it. But regardless, this series culminates with The Rose of the World to finish it off. And this one is a bit longer than the other two. Just shy of 600 pages, not quite 580. And if it's true to form, 2004, perhaps 2005? Yep, published in 2005. And I'll go ahead and read off the summary for the end of the series. Since the dawn of time in the world of Elda, three powerful magical beings controlled the balance of the world and everything in it. The people and creatures of Elda lived in harmony and peace through the support of three godlike entities: the woman, the man, and the beast. And if you've been paying attention, basically, Istrians with their fire goddess, and Aryans with Arans, again, Aryans, anyway, just supporting my idea, their god Sur, those two entities, and then the beast hasn't really been mentioned thus far, but anyways, but far in the past, the protective balance of the three was disrupted by the greed and lust of one man, the greatest sorcerer Elda has ever known. Rahe, master of magic, through cunning and avarice, managed to imprison the male god and steal away the other two, the woman and the beast. Removing their memories for his own base purposes, he secluded himself in the Arctic fortress of Sanctuary, and for hundreds of years enjoyed his prizes in private. And I just have to say that, frankly, with all of the despicable characters in the book and all the events that take place, there's basically three main, I'm just going to call them complete dirtbags. The one brother I already mentioned, the one who is very satisfying to see die. This guy, who basically threw off the entire balance of the entire world for his own selfish needs and wants. And then there's a third character, and I don't know if it's going to mention that in the summary, but I'll finish that first. Now, Elda is divided into two warring nations, Aera and Istria. The men and women of the rugged northern isles of Aera are a proud and strong people. Home by centuries spent in a harsh, unforgiving climate, they too have become harsh and unforgiving. They worship a male sea god Sur, whom they believe dwells on the ocean floor. Yet in their egalitarian society, women choose their husbands, and can also choose to dissolve their marriages. Women can take up trade, sail great northern longboats, and are in all ways equals of men. However, in southern Istria, things are quite the reverse. The Istrians worship a fire goddess, Fala, whom they believe was birthed with her feline familiar from a volcano in the Golden Mountains. Okay, that's where the beast comes in. Women in their society have no power and must remain veiled at all times, shrouded in garments that leave only their mouths and hands visible. Considered property, they are relegated to the world of carnal pleasure, to be used and disposed of in any way the men of their society wish. Any who rebel are cleansed in the fires of Fala. However, after 3 centuries, Rahe became overconfident and has lost its two greatest prizes. Loose in the world once more, the Rosa Eldi, most strange and extraordinary of women, is slowly regaining her memories, while her male counterpart begins to stir, and her cat, Bete, stretches the newfound claws of her true form. And I will mention that with this goddess, Rosa Eldi, it seems that she's somewhat impotent, because despite being a goddess, despite regaining her powers, there are at least a couple of times where she might have been able to save people's lives, might have been able to usurp, the forces of evil, and it's like, nope, she's too impotent. And I really was annoyed by that, because again, it only extends the length of the tragedy, it extends the hopelessness, and basically it makes the antagonist too successful and the protagonist far too incompetent and unsuccessful. And then continuing on, but though most of her memories have been lost, Rosa Elodie is still a powerful creature. Yeah, right. And while she is by nature benign, she has been made dangerous by the fact that she has no understanding of her magical abilities. Deadly magical talismans are created by her touch, and lust-crazed men from both the north and the south go to war hoping to claim this enigmatic woman who inspires unquenchable passion in every man who sees her. Meanwhile, in this frozen fortress, Rahe plots to regain his lost treasure, using three men he has imbued with unusual powers: the giant, the madman, and the fool, to do his magical bidding. And from what I remember, even though it talks about them having magical powers or unusual powers, I don't even remember them doing anything, let alone having anything that was, truly interesting or unique to them. So either they were mostly inept or they didn't really do anything. I just don't remember anything about them. Can the Rose of the World discover her true identity, unite with her divine co-regents, and restore her world? Or will man's baser nature triumph and bring ruin to Elder forever? And I should point out that the first two books and their summaries really didn't mention her at all, and it focused much more on Katla and other supporting characters. But here the emphasis changes, and I think that's an issue because, again, there's about 1,500 pages, about 1,600 pages actually, if I'm doing my math accurately, for which the storylines, the parallel events and perspective that are taking place to develop, but it sort of works. I don't want to say it works against the story, but I think the author was taking on too many perspectives and it just didn't wind up developing any one of them incredibly well, especially with the tone. It was so bleak most of the time, and I think it was too in favor of the bad guys being successful, and it really worked against the overall tone and development of the story. And especially at the very end, despite the title, The Rose of the World, and the summary, which would suggest that, some degree of positivity or optimism, it's actually very bleak. And this last book, people are dying by the scores. The protagonists are tortured. They endure great suffering more than once. And, they keep falling into bleak situations. And it's one thing for characters and people to endure hardships through a story, but I think that the author took that a little too strong to heart, because I don't know, it's like they thought that the more that they endured, that if they succeeded overall and there was some triumph at the end, that it would shine all the brighter. But in this case, they endured so much and there was so much negativity, it just made everything sort of gloomy and bleak, that it wasn't a great triumph. It wasn't a shining moment. It was too little too late. It was dingy. It was dirty and tainted. So by the time I finished, I didn't really feel as if I had been on this great journey and this amazing story, and introduced to a world that I would want to go to. I think that's one of the benefits of reading fantasy stories, is being introduced to a world that's interesting and exciting, and yes, dangerous and scary, but there's enough. It's worth fighting for. It would inspire you to want to defend it, even though you're not necessarily a native inhabitant. But here, it's like, I'll leave it. I don't want to be a part of this nonsense. And again, I've already been doing spoilers throughout. This is near the very end, and it was. I remember this vividly because it was so jaw-droppingly stupid. But what happens is that, it already was indicating this in the summary, but the two nations and all of these different people, it reaches a fever pitch, and it is all-out war. And by the time things work out at the end, where the gods are regaining their full power and their full, their memories are restored and so forth, they are restored, I think is the best way to put it. I think there's another word I was trying to find, but basically they regain their godhood, and you would think that would be the end of it and they would stop fighting, but the war continues on. And what happens is she performs a miracle, and all of their swords and their spears and their weapons, they're transmogrified into tools, rakes and hoes and different gardening implements. And it's like, so stop fighting, stop using these. I think that's actually an expression. Smithing plows into swords. This was kind of the reverse of that. It's like, re-smith your swords and blunt them into plows so that you can go back to being farmers and being peaceful. But no, they are still at war. They are still fighting. So they just take their transmogrified items and they keep going at it. And it's like, what the heck? And it's like, okay, that was one thing. But then what happens is the women who are present, they charge out and they disrobe. And then that's what brings the war to an end. And I was truly flummoxed. I was just agape. I was like, what in the world is going on? Are you serious? It was already bad enough that the men were just so fevered and so fervent to fight that it's like, screw this miracle, keep hacking away. But then what stops them dead in their tracks? And it's like, okay, we're gonna drop our weapons, we're done. Women get naked. I didn't even know what to think about that. And I think what's sad about this is, as a series, and with the way that the characters were written and developed, especially the first two with Katla, and she was still a prominent character in the third one, I felt like this was supposed to be a story that was empowering towards women, especially, again, with the concept where in the history and culture the women were subjugated, and by the end they would be able to throw off their smothering garments and not be lower class citizens. So kind of a redemption story, and then the strong female lead and then the female goddess. But I don't know, it just didn't really, that ending didn't cement and fully establish that idea. It just seemed to make a mockery of that, if that makes sense. It just seems so, I don't know, it was just such a stupid moment. And I should mention that the whole reintroduction of magic into the world and Katla's abilities, they weren't really developed by the end of the story. She, again, with the whole idea that she would be a strong, prominent figure, again with a goddess, her abilities were pretty much inept and impotent, and Katla's, hers were as well, which I thought really, it's like she hamstrung her female protagonists who could have done so much more. And that could have been a really good contrast. You know, you have these well-intentioned men who are trying to be a support figure, who are trying to, you know, they have noble intentions. They're trying to be positive forces, but they just don't have it in them. That could have been contrasted, you know, with the goddess, her really doling out some justice, with Katla taking the helm, you know, stepping up and using her her innate magical abilities to do what the men couldn't, and to be a rallying force to lead the charge. But it didn't do that. And you know, I had such aspirations for the end of this series, and it was muddled, and it was just, it spoiled so much potential, and it was such a waste, and I was so disappointed. And by the end of it, I can't recommend this book series. I could almost reading the first book just for somewhat of a novelty experience, because again, I thought it had some interesting characters and so much potential. I was very interested, and even through the second book, I was still kind of intrigued, and I was curious to see what would happen. But you know, I hate to say it, but you know, a bad ending can ruin a promising start. That's completely the case, and this is a tragic but a great example of that. So at least the third book, I would say, would be a definite burn it category. But on the one hand, I want to say the promising start in the first two would almost make them worth reading, but when it only is going to be a grim ending, a sorry conclusion, I'd have to say that it all kind of is tarnished, and it's all kind of a burn it. So I suppose perhaps if you're interested in somewhat of a world building experience, if you want to just see another possible, if you just like exploring different people's worlds and settings, and just to see, just kind of like a walking simulator in a context of reading, that would almost be worth it. But nah, I can't recommend this series. I'd have to say burn it all, and that's really disappointing. I was very hopeful with this series, but just didn't work out. Excuse me. But anyways, that's gonna be this trilogy, and yeah, so disappointing. But anyways, this was a really long video. I'm almost tempted to maybe break this up into sections just so it's not so lengthy, and because I know as a viewer that a really long video can be a little too much. So I think I will break this into shorter segments. But anyways, have a good one, folks, and I'll see you around.